In the fading winter of 1983, inside a dim motel room on the edge of Los Angeles, the neon lights flickered like a dying heartbeat. There, surrounded by silence and half-empty bottles, Big Mama Thornton tried to steady her trembling hands. Her voice once shook the foundations of American music, but now even breathing felt like lifting a mountain. The woman who roared hound dog into existence was staring at a mirror that no longer reflected strength, only exhaustion, betrayal, and the weight of 1,000 unspoken wounds. Outside, the city glowed with the very fame she helped build, yet never truly tasted. Inside, her body whispered its warnings: the rapid weight loss, the hidden painkillers, the gin disguised as salvation. And somewhere deep in her memory lingered a single moment, a cruel sentence, a devastating theft, a night that pushed her closer to the edge than anyone ever knew. This is not the story of the woman the world thought they understood. This is the untold truth of Big Mama Thornton. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. The childhood wound that no song could heal. Long before the neon streets of Los Angeles swallowed her whole, Willie Mae Thornton grew up in a cramped house in Montgomery, Alabama, where the air always smelled of chalky dust, hot pavement, and the tired hymns of Sunday mornings. The world knew her as Big Mama Thornton, but the child inside that young girl never had a name. Nobody bothered to give one. In her home, she was simply the strong one, the big one, the one who can work. And that label would shape every wound she carried into adulthood. Her father, a strict Baptist minister, believed music was a sacred language reserved only for God. Blues to him was a doorway to sin, a path for bad women, as he often called them. When he caught his daughter humming the rhythms she heard from the juke joints on the edge of town, he didn't scold her gently. He used words that cut deeper than any belt could reach. Blues will ruin you. Stop before you become one of them. She never forgot the way he said them, as if women who sang their truth were creatures to be ashamed of. At home, the rules were simple. Her brothers were praised. Her sisters were protected, and she, with her tall frame and heavy bones, was the one assigned to lift furniture, run errands, and stay out of the way. Her mother tried to soften the blows, offering an occasional smile or gentle pat on the back, but her mother's early death shattered the only fragile warmth she ever knew. At just 14 years old, Willie Mae was suddenly alone in a house that grew colder by the minute. The neighbors didn't help. They saw her size long before they saw her talent. Children on the street shouted things like, "You walk like a boy!" or "Ain't no man gonna want you." She pretended she didn't hear them. She pretended the laughter didn't land. But each insult burrowed deep, carving out a hollow space where confidence should have grown. When she sang in church, though, something miraculous happened. Her voice filled the room like a storm rolling over dry land. People turned. People listened. People felt something. But instead of celebrating her gift, her father saw it as defiance. And one day, he made sure she never forgot it. After catching her practicing a blues riff she'd heard behind a local bar, he delivered the sentence that would echo in her mind for decades. "You're embarrassing this family. Stop singing that devil's music." It wasn't just a command. It was a condemnation, one that told a teenage girl her natural voice was a sin. This mixture of grief, rejection, and forbidden desire for music formed the warped emotional map she would follow for the rest of her life. The need to be heard. The fear of being seen. The hunger for love mixed with the expectation of betrayal. It all began here, in a house where affection was rationed, but discipline was abundant. When her mother died, the home collapsed under unspoken grief, and so did her place within it. With nothing tying her down, she drifted toward music the way a moth drifts toward a flame, knowing it could burn her, but needing its light to survive. She left Montgomery carrying only the clothes on her back and one invisible companion. A deep wound of abandonment that would later make her vulnerable to every manipulative lover, every predatory manager, every false friend who would eventually take pieces of her life. Those early years carved something into her, a belief that kindness was temporary, love was conditional, and respect had to be earned through force, not trust. And so she built walls thick, jagged, towering. She hid behind humor, behind sarcasm, behind the volume of her own voice. People thought she was tough because she looked tough. But the truth was simpler and sadder. She was tough because she never had the luxury of being anything else. And beneath that armor, a child was still crying out for the mother who disappeared too soon. The irony, the cruel twist of fate, was that the very wounds that made her vulnerable also made her extraordinary. Her power on stage didn't come from ego, it came from pain. From the years she spent being silenced. From the hunger to be acknowledged. From the belief that if she couldn't be loved for who she was, she would at least be unforgettable for what she could do. In every growl, every shout, every trembling note, she was trying to prove to a world and to a father long gone that she was not a sin. She was not a mistake. She was not the punchline the neighborhood children used to whisper about. She was a voice. And she would make that voice impossible to ignore. When the spotlight finally found her, it asked for something in return. If you fronts, when Willie Mae Thornton first stepped onto a real stage, not a church altar, not a dusty street corner, but a stage with proper lights and a paying audience, it felt like God had cracked open the sky just for her. The microphone was cheap, the speakers buzzed, and the club smelled like stale cigarette smoke mixed with spilled beer, but none of that mattered. For the first time in her life, people weren't looking at her size, her clothes, or her past. They were listening. Her voice didn't glide, it hit. It landed with the weight of someone who had been holding back an ocean for years. The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. And in that tiny, electrified moment, Big Mama Thornton knew she had something the world couldn't ignore. Her rise was not glamorous, no limousine introductions, no glittering magazine covers, no elite Hollywood dinners. Her ascent came from sweat, brutal touring schedules, and nights spent sleeping in the back of vans so cold she could see her breath. But what kept her going was the way people reacted when she opened her mouth. The shock, the awe, the disbelief that so much raw force could come from one human being. Word traveled quickly through southern bars and juke joints. There's a woman out there who can outsing any man alive. If you frine, producers, managers, and club owners began to circle around her, not out of compassion, but calculation. They saw profit in her voice. They saw novelty in her presence. And so she became a kind of spectacle, a powerhouse blueswoman who could silence a room with a single growl. On stage, she was unstoppable. Off stage, she was invisible. Then came the song that would change her life forever. A track she recorded in a studio that cared more about time efficiency than artistic truth. Hound Dog. If you froze, it took her one take. Just one. She walked into the booth, already carrying the weight of every insult, every rejection, every bruise from her childhood. She channeled it into a sound so sharp, so fierce, that the sound engineer reportedly removed his headphones because it was too much power at once. Is one comes of Maberstair. When the record spun back through the speakers, everyone in the room knew they had captured something monumental. But no one told her. No one celebrated her. No one foresaw the revolution she had just ignited. The song stormed through the black music charts, selling 500,000 copies, but Thornton saw barely a fraction of the money. Contracts drafted by men who smiled too politely ensured that she remained the least compensated person in every room where decisions were made. Her voice made other people rich. Her voice made other people famous. Her voice made Elvis Presley a legend. When his version exploded across America, newspapers credited him with creating a new sound. DJs introduced the song as Presley's invention. White audiences celebrated the energy, the swagger, the wildness, never knowing the original version belonged to a woman whose name was slowly being erased in plain sight. But Thornton didn't break. Not yet. Instead, she threw herself into performing with a ferocity that startled even her closest friends. She sang like she was trying to outrun her own ghosts. She toured so relentlessly that some weeks she performed 7 nights in a row without sleeping in the same bed twice. Her voice became both her blessing and her punishment, a tool that brought attention, but demanded everything in return. And sacrifices followed. The first sacrifice, her body. To maintain the power of her performances, she began drinking before shows. At first, it was harmless, a sip to calm the nerves, to soften the edges of old wounds. But audiences expected the volcanic energy she delivered on stage. Promoters expected spectacle. Managers expected perfection. So she fed herself gin like it was fuel. Night after night, she pushed further, belting until her throat burned, performing until her chest ached, skipping meals because alcohol was easier than food. Her health slowly bowed under the weight of the expectations she carried. The second sacrifice, her identity. In an era obsessed with polished femininity, Thornton refused to shrink herself into anyone's ideal. She wore men's suits, heavy boots, loose shirts. She swaggered instead of gliding. She barked instead of whispering. Her authenticity was magnetic but dangerous. Record labels didn't know how to market a black woman with the physical presence of a linebacker and the voice of a storm god. So they tried to change her. Some urged her to dress more ladylike. Others suggested she lose weight. One producer even said she would never be taken seriously unless she acted feminine. She laughed in their faces, a big, thunderous laugh, but their words etched themselves into her bones. They were telling her that being herself wasn't enough. The third sacrifice, her love life. Success attracted people not for who she was, but for what she could offer. Lovers came and went, leaving behind empty promises and financial scars. One stole her savings. Another siphoned her money under the guise of managing her. Each betrayal carved deeper into her trust, until she began to believe a devastating lie, that she was unlovable outside the spotlight. As her career soared, her loneliness expanded with it. She filled that emptiness with more performances, more touring, more nights spent chasing applause that always evaporated too quickly. The show ended. The audience left, and she returned to hotels where silence waited like a punishment. But despite these sacrifices, there were moments brief, blinding, unforgettable, when Big Mama Thornton felt genuinely powerful. On stage, she, was untouchable. Her voice rattled bones. Her harmonica lines shimmered through smoky rooms like lightning in a bottle. Audiences didn't just hear her, they felt her, as if she were reaching into their chests and squeezing. With every performance, she tried to hold on to that feeling, to remind herself that she mattered, that her existence had weight, that the world couldn't take everything from her. But fame is not a companion. Fame is a negotiator. And eventually, it demanded payment. Behind the applause, behind the roaring crowds and the spotlight that seemed glued to her silhouette, a new shadow was forming, one made of exhaustion, resentment, and a slow-burning grief that would one day explode into the darkest chapter of her life. The chapter where love would betray her. The chapter where addiction would tighten its grip. The chapter where the woman who once shook America with her voice would begin to crumble from within. And that chapter begins with a single, devastating truth. Even at her peak, Big Mama Thornton was not celebrated, she was consumed. The heart that roared on stage broke in silence. And well discerned, by the time Big Mama Thornton reached the height of her musical power, she had learned to navigate smoky stages, greedy managers, and the ruthless politics of the industry. But what she never learned, what no one had ever taught her, was how to protect her heart. Fame sharpened her voice, but it left her unguarded in one devastating way. She believed too quickly in the people who said they cared. Her first great heartbreak didn't come from a rival or a record label. It came from a man who slipped into her life quietly, with the same softness her childhood had denied her. He wasn't handsome or charming in the traditional sense, but he had a way of speaking that felt warm in a world that had always been cold to her. He told her she was brilliant. He told her she was rare. He told her she deserved to be respected. And she believed him. For a woman who had grown up hearing she was too much, too big, too loud, too unfeminine, this sudden attention felt like oxygen. For once, someone didn't seem embarrassed to stand beside her. For once, she felt wanted. But affection disguised as admiration has a dangerous twin: exploitation. It didn't take long for him to start managing her money. What began as small favors, picking up a fee from a promoter, collecting payment from a club owner, soon became habitual. He insisted she trust him. He insisted he was protecting her from greedy businessmen. He insisted he could build her future. But in the end, he built only his own. One day, after a show that left her exhausted and aching from head to toe, she discovered that weeks of her earnings had vanished. The man who claimed to love her was gone, leaving behind nothing but an empty drawer and a single cruel truth. She had been robbed by the only person she allowed into her heart. The loss wasn't just financial. It reopened the childhood wound her father had carved into her, the belief that love, even when it feels real, is always conditional, always temporary, always waiting to turn on you. She tried to bury the pain. She tried to drown it. But betrayal has a way of creeping through every crack. The second relationship arrived like a storm, loud, intoxicating, and unpredictable. The man she fell for this time was fiery, charismatic, and cruel in ways that took time to recognize. He loved her talent, but despised her independence. He admired her strength, but resented its weight. He lived in the shadow of her power and feared it would swallow him whole. At first, the arguments were small, complaints about her schedule, her long nights, her drinking, her refusal to conform to feminine expectations. But slowly, his insecurity transformed into hostility. One night, after an especially intense rehearsal, he spat words that cut deeper than any knife. "Ain't nobody gonna love a woman who looks like you. I'm the only one who puts up with it. And great free is one of the matters." In that single sentence, he attacked everything she had fought against her entire life. Her body, her identity, her dignity. For the first time, Big Mama, who could silence a nightclub with one note, felt speechless. The emotional blows escalated. He mocked her clothes. He questioned her talent. He belittled her success as lucky breaks. And when he drank, the criticism turned into rage. He smashed bottles. He slammed doors. He threw accusations as if they were weapons designed to weaken her resolve. Some nights, she locked herself in the bathroom, sitting on the cold floor with her hands pressed against trembling knees, whispering to herself that tomorrow would be different. Some nights, she wished for someone, anyone, to knock on her door and say she didn't deserve this. But no one came. And she never told a soul. She stayed because leaving meant admitting she had chosen wrong again. She stayed because loneliness felt even more terrifying than cruelty. She stayed because deep down, the little girl inside her still believed she needed to earn love. But the breaking point arrived in the most humiliating way possible. At a crowded backstage lounge after a show, she discovered that the man she trusted had been sleeping with someone from her own band, a musician she had mentored, supported, and fed when the girl had no money. The betrayal struck like a physical blow. Witnesses would later recall the moment vividly. Big Mama's shoulders stiffening, her expression collapsing into something hollow, and the room falling silent as the truth spread like wildfire. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked out. But the wound stayed a deep, festering gash that no performance, no applause, and no bottle could heal. In the aftermath, she became a different version of herself. On stage, she roared louder than ever, as if challenging the universe to break her completely. But offstage, she withdrew. She stopped trusting. She stopped believing in promises. She stopped seeking tenderness. And slowly, the walls she had spent her entire life building, brick by brick, insult by insult, became a prison. People around her noticed the shift. Her humor became sharper. Her temper grew unpredictable. Her laughter sounded forced, as if coming from someone who had forgotten how to feel joy naturally. But perhaps the most haunting change was the way she talked about herself. In small, unguarded moments, she repeated a phrase that terrified those who cared. "Everybody leaves. The bottle stays." That's Hooverboard Bear. It was more than a sentence. It was a surrender. The love she once longed for had become the very force that weakened her spirit. And in the quiet spaces between performances, she began turning to alcohol not for relief, but for escape. Escape from memory, from humiliation, from the echo of voices that told her she wasn't enough. The tragedy of Big Mama Thornton's love life wasn't that she was unlucky. It was that every wound she endured confirmed the lie she had been taught as a girl that she was undeserving of gentle love. And with every betrayal, she retreated deeper into the shadows. Toward addiction. Toward collapse. Toward the final chapter of her life. A chapter where the world would see her suffering but far too late to save her. The voice that once shook America was slowly collapsing from the inside. That's Hooverboard Body. In the final decade of her life, Big Mama Thornton's downfall didn't arrive like a dramatic explosion. It crept in quietly, inch by inch, the way night replaces daylight, without anyone noticing exactly when the darkness wins. Her decline was not a single tragedy, but an accumulation of thousands of betrayals, humiliations, losses, and the haunting silence that followed crowds who once worshipped her. As the music industry shifted toward polished pop stars and marketable faces, Big Mama found herself drifting to the margins. The same producers who once begged her for performances had moved on to newer, cleaner, more profitable voices. Her name was still spoken with admiration among serious musicians, but admiration never paid hospital bills. Admiration never fixed a broken heart. Her body, worn from decades of nightly eruptions of power, began to whisper its warnings. At first, she ignored the aches. She downplayed the breathlessness. She dismissed the tremors in her hands. But the warnings grew louder, and denial became costly. Her drinking, which began as a coping mechanism, transformed into a routine, then into a dependency, and finally into a private battle she no longer tried to hide. Friends recall nights where she used gin the way others used water, swallowing it as casually as if it were medicine. 1 pint a day became 1.5, sometimes more. The alcohol became the only constant in a life that had taught her constants were rare. But the body always keeps score. The first collapse. The first medical collapse came backstage in the early 1980 seconds, after a performance that left her drenched in sweat and gasping for air. She attributed it to exhaustion, but the paramedics who arrived smelled the alcohol before they even reached her. At the hospital, doctors noted severe dehydration, dangerously low blood sugar, and an enlarged liver. A nurse later recalled that when asked about her eating habits, Big Mama admitted she had not eaten a full meal in days. Gin had become her breakfast, her lunch, and her dinner. Food became optional. The bottle was essential. The weight loss, that shocked doctors. Over 2 years, her weight dropped by more than 45 kilograms. A woman who once carried 180 pounds of stage power dwindled to a mere 95 pounds, a number that horrified the few friends left in her circle. Her cheeks hollowed, her clothes hung loosely, and her once powerful frame looked fragile, as if a strong breeze could knock her to the ground. When asked about the weight loss, she joked, as she often did to mask pain, that she was finally fitting Hollywood's beauty standards. We're had it play, but the truth was far from humorous. Her liver was failing. Her muscles were atrophying. Her immune system was collapsing under the strain of alcohol and malnutrition. The hidden drugs few knew about. It wasn't just alcohol. She often swallowed packs of BC powder and Goodies powder, over-the-counter pain relievers that were common among touring musicians. But Big Mama used them not for headaches. She used them to dull the persistent burn in her chest and the sharp pains in her abdomen. The combination of aspirin, caffeine, and salicylamide ravaged her stomach lining. Doctors warned her repeatedly, but warnings meant little to a woman who had spent her life performing through pain. She also used codeine cough syrup to soothe her throat after intense performances, mixing it with gin and honey in her own throat tonic, a concoction as destructive as it was comforting. In private moments, she called it my medicine. Would have to zun, but it was slowly destroying her. The night her body gave up. One night, paramedics were called again after she collapsed on a floor littered with clothing, empty bottles, and a harmonica she had tried to play minutes before falling unconscious. At the hospital, her blood alcohol concentration measured 0. 39%, a level that should have been fatal. A young doctor later wrote, "She told me she didn't eat because food made her too tired to sing." She believed alcohol was keeping her alive. We're had it play. It was a sentence that broke the medical team's hearts because it revealed the truth. she no longer understood the difference between survival and destruction. Fighting, with nobody watching. Her final months were marked by a strange mixture of resilience and despair. She performed when she could, sitting in chairs, barely able to hold the harmonica steady. Despite the frailty, the moment she opened her mouth, the room still vibrated. Her voice, though weaker, still carried a spark of the wildfire it once was. Audiences who witnessed those late performances described them as haunting, angelic, and tragically beautiful. To a 9 stays, but those performances were rare. More often, she was alone in a small motel room, surrounded by silence and the weight of unspoken memories. Her phone rang less. Promoters called less. Friends visited less. Loneliness wrapped itself around her like a cold blanket. The spirit cracks. One of the most heartbreaking testimonies came from a fellow musician who visited her only weeks before her death. In a rare moment of vulnerability, she said, "If I stop singing, I stop being me. If I stop drinking, I don't know who I am at all." To a 99, these were not the words of a woman giving up. These were the words of a woman who had never been taught how to exist without suffering. The final days. By 1984, her organs were failing. The damage from alcohol, starvation, and years of untreated medical issues had become irreversible. She could barely walk. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin was fragile. Yet even then, she insisted on keeping her harmonica close, a reminder of the life she had built with her own hands, even as that life slipped away. Her final collapse came quietly. There was no dramatic scene, no weeping audience, no cameras, no press. She died in a modest room in Los Angeles at just 57 years old, a giant reduced to a shadow, a legend who never received the honors she deserved. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but those who knew her understood. It was heartbreak. It was betrayal. It was the violence of an industry that exploited her voice and abandoned her when she was no longer profitable. It was the silence after a lifetime of roaring. The legacy the world almost forgot. And yet, even in death, Big Mama Thornton refused to vanish. Her influence, once buried under layers of injustice, began to rise. Musicians across generations recognized her as the true architect of a sound that reshaped American culture. Her version of Hound Dog became a historical landmark. Her vocal power became a blueprint for blues, soul, and rock artists who came after her. But her legacy carries a warning. She was a victim of an industry that rewarded imitation over origin, image over talent, profit over humanity. Her downfall mirrors the experience of countless black artists who built the foundation of American music only to be robbed of credit, dignity, and financial stability. Her story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth. Fame can immortalize the voice while destroying the person behind it. Big Mama Thornton didn't die forgotten. She died unprotected. She died underpaid. She died uncelebrated. But she also died having changed music forever. Her voice lives in every stage that trembles, every note that growls, every singer who dares to sing from the deepest part of their soul. And the tragedy of her final chapter only magnifies the brilliance of her first.